So yesterday we have covered some basics like what are the different types of variables, and then I have shown you few tips like how we can use these operators, especially this unary operators, and then we have seen how we can even use the printf rather than using system.out.println. I have shown you how to use the system.out.printf, and we have seen what are the uses of percentile o, percentile b, percentile x. All those things we have covered, and then few of the bitwise operators, how they perform also we have seen, and then we have covered all the types of operators, and at the last we have concluded with arrays. We have seen one-dimensional arrays and two-dimensional arrays, how we create, and we also understood the difference between the arrays of created in C as well as in Java, because in Java arrays are created dynamically. Along with that, we have also understood that each and every row can have different sized columns. All those things we have understood in yesterday's class, and yesterday I also said that with that we concluded the Java fundamentals, and after Java fundamentals I have asked you to practice this logic building our plan M1. I hope all of you have began your journey in solving these logic building problems, and as I mentioned, any problem you are unable to pass through all the test cases, do let me know so that I will share my view on that. And let's begin the next concept after Java fundamentals. It's oops or inheritance. So the topics which we have to cover under this oops or inheritance is classes and objects, encapsulation or abstraction, inheritance, overriding or polymorphism, garbage collection, string buffer. So these are the topics we need to cover as part of this oops concepts. Now what we do is we have scheduled it for 5 days. I'm not going to take that long because I know that most of you are familiar with these basic OOP concepts. So I'll try to wind up these things in 3 days itself, rather than following as per the schedule of 5 days. I'll just try to cover them in 3 days. And what I'll be doing is, along with the concepts, I'll also share some tips, just like I've been doing since last 3 days. I'll be sharing some tips that helps you for the assessment exams. My motive is to make sure that not only concept understanding, you should be understanding the insights of each and every concept in such a way that however tricky the question was given, you should be able to answer it in a better way. And I want all of you to perform your assessments very better than compared to earlier when you have taken these assessment tests, which will guide you for further placements as well. So for that reason, what I'll be doing is, along with the concept teaching, I'll just show you in the IDE what are the things you need to understand, how the execution behaves if few minor changes were made to the code. So all those things I'll be covering as part of the concept teaching. Let's begin with the first one, classes and objects. And one more thing I would like to remind, yesterday few of them have personally messaged me saying that this PBLapp is not working, and a few others have queries like how many systems I can use. One thing you understand, since I have been saying that all your Synergy resume IDs are being monitored, I think few of them were raising these queries. Let me tell you, at the most 3 devices. It can be your mobile, it can be your laptop, whatever it is. At the most 3 devices only you have to use, and at a point of time, only one device can be active with that Synergy resume ID. I repeat, at the most 3 devices only can be used for any Synergy resume ID, and at any point of time, only one device should be active with that Synergy resume ID. And if anybody is facing any issues like session being expired, once try to clear your history and cache, and try to re-log in. So these are the advices that were given by Wipro team. So when I have received some complaints from your classmates, I have just forwarded those complaints to Wipro team. So the answer what they have given is this. So at the most 3 devices, and at any point of time only one device should be active for any Synergy resume ID. And if anybody facing session expired very fastly, try to clear your browsing history and all the cache and try to re-log in into the PBLapp. So these are the some important points I would like to mention regarding this PBLapp. And let me just get started with today's content. So since it's expiring, and since from 10 onwards, almost all the colleges who are giving training, they are active. That's the reason what I'm doing is, before starting this live class, I've just opened all the pages that are required, so that I won't face any delay while going through these pages. So here is the classes and objects. So this is the classes and objects. So you all know Java is an object-oriented programming language. By now, I am sure that whether it is EC students or the CSC students, every one of you know the definition of what is a class and what is a object. So in general, object is the real world entity, whereas class is only the descriptive entity. This is one simple definition which can be remembered by everyone. So object is the real world physical entity, whereas class is just the descriptive component. So when you say class, you can only describe. What you can describe? You can describe the state and behavior of the physical world existence. That is the object. So with a class, you can only describe the nature of the object. And what you mean by the nature? That is the state and behavior. So every object will have its own state and behavior. That's what the basic thing you just need to remember as part of class and object. So object is the real world physical existence entity, whereas class is just a descriptive component. And what it describes is, it describes the nature of the object. And what do you mean by nature of the object? Nature of the object means both state and behavior. Let's understand it by some simple example. Now, we all are human beings. We all are human beings. Now, if I just take a class person, if I just take the example of a class person, so you cannot directly show a person. You cannot directly show a person. You can show the physical world existence, like me. You can show me Lavakumar is a person. You can show Lavakumar is a person. So Lavakumar is the physical existence. Whatever that you describe with the person class, that Lavakumar possess. Whatever you describe with regard to a person class, that will be possessed by Lavakumar. So what you describe with the person class, you describe that a person has some state and behavior. What are those state and behavior you describe with regard to a person class? You say that any person will have name, height, color, weight, something like this you will be defining. So these are all the state. So since we have already covered the data types, when I am saying this state, you can imagine in your mind which data type suits for which particular state. Like when I am saying a person will be having name, obviously name should be described using a string type. When you say height, since height will be in terms of real value, you will be using float data type for this height. Next, color. So color again you will be defining using a string type. Next, weight. Again weight you can use real value, so you can use a float type. So something like this. So whatever the state you describe with regard to a person class, all those things you will be describing, and that we call it as the data. And coming to the behavior, what are the behaviors? Like a person, can eat, a person can jump, a person can run. So, what are these? These are the behaviors, and whatever the behaviors you are specifying, all those behaviors can be possessed by any real world person, like me as example. For instance, Lavkumar is an instance of a person class who has a name, a color, some value for height, some value for weight, and he can run, he can jump, he can sit, he can eat, whatever behaviors that you describe with regard to person class, all those behaviors and all those data, whatever you describe, they will be possessed by every real world person, every real world person, and the values may differ. Definitely the values will differ. That's what we will be understanding. So for a single class you can have n number of objects being created, where each and every object will have its own set of values. For a single class you can create n number of objects, where each and every object will have its own set of values. So, in yesterday's class, we have discussed the types of variables. Like we have seen three types of variables are there in Java. What are they? First, class variables or instance variables. Next, we have seen the static variables and then local variables. Yesterday itself, we understood that local variables are those variables which are bound to a method whose life exists within the method, whereas class or instance variables. Instance variables are those variables which can be accessed by all the methods of the class and which are declared inside a class. So those variables that are declared inside a class above all its methods, we call them instance variables, and they are bounded by object. They are bounded by object. So that is the point what I am trying to convey here. So every object will have its own set of values. Like if you consider me as one example, then whatever the state you are saying, like name Lavakumar, height 5'7", weight 67, color some complexion, some or the other values whatever you define, it differs from you. So your name is different, your height is different, your weight is different, your color is different. So every object can have its own set of values, and every behavior might differ with respect to its state. Every behavior will differ with respect to its state. Like because of my height value, the run or the long jump which I take will differ from the jump what you will take. Both of us will have behaviors, but those behaviors will depend on the actual state. Those behaviors will depend on the actual state. So that is what. So here, since we also cover static block in this particular class today, I'm just reminding of the static variables which we have discussed yesterday. So what are the static variables? So static variables are the class variables. That means for all the objects you will have single copy, whereas instance variables are those variables which will be separate copy for each object. So each and every object will have separate copy. That's what with the instance variables. But coming to static variables, all the objects are going to share a single copy of the class. That is what the static variables. So static variables, single copy for all the objects. Instance variables, separate copy for each object. So these are the points you just need to remember. Now, since we are saying class is just a descriptive component, you must be able to understand, so it doesn't occupy any memory. Since it's only a description, we are only describing the nature of the real world object. So what exactly occupies the space in the memory is object. Object when created, then only it requires some space. So when you describe some car, you don't require any space. When you describe the nature of a car, you don't require any space. But when you have a real car, you require some space to accommodate it. In similar fashion, for describing a class, you don't require any memory, but to define a real world object, you require memory for its storage. That's the point you just need to understand regarding the class and object. Next, coming to static block. So, understand the point that static block is the very first block that gets executed by JVM even before the constructor gets executed. I repeat, static block is the very first block that gets executed by JVM even before the constructor gets executed. Again, you may get a doubt what is constructor. Let's get into those details slowly. So, whenever you create an object, you will be invoking the constructor. Whenever you create an object, you will be invoking the constructor. What is the role of the constructor? The role of the constructor is to initialize the object. The role of the constructor is to initialize the object. That means whatever the instance variables that you define inside a class, all those instance variables should be initialized when the object is being created. So whatever the instance variables that you will be defining inside a class should be initialized when the real world object is being created. And who will take care of that? Constructor. Who will take care of that? Constructor. So constructor is a special kind of method which has the name exactly same as the class name without any return type, meant for initializing the object. I repeat, constructor is a special kind of method which has the same name as class name, meant for initializing the instance, initializing the object. This is what you can just remember. So its role is to initialize the object. That means whatever the description you are saying with regard to class, saying that a person class, example, a person class has name, height, color, weight. Now, but you are not specifying the values. You are just saying a person will have some name, color, height, weight. Now, when a real person is created, that means when a real child is being created, then a name should be assigned, height value should be initialized, whatever his weight is there, that should be initialized, and by looking the color, that color should be defined. So all these things will differ when the object is being created. That is the reason the role of constructor is to initialize these values of the instance variables. So that is the role of the constructor, and it is a special kind of method, we say, which will be having the same name as the class name. Then only it will be treated as the constructor, and whenever on any object is being created, you will be invoking the constructor. Now why I'm saying this is, since I'm discussing about this static block, I'm just mentioning this. So we all know that we can have any number of classes in a program. We can have any number of classes in a program. Despite of n number of classes we have in a program, still we are able to identify the starting point of execution. How? By seeing which class has the public static void main with string array as arguments. Public static void main with string array as arguments. So that will be the beginning point of my execution. And there you are going to call the constructor by creating some objects. So before that also, which gets executed? Static block. So static block is the very first block that gets executed in any Java program even before the constructor is invoked. Even before the constructor is invoked. And another thing is that we also have initialization block used in Java. Instead of constructor, some of them will also use the initialization block. So the initialization block is invoked when the constructor is called. The initialization block is invoked when the constructor is called. But static block even before the constructor is called. Remember this point. Static block is executed even before the constructor is called, whereas initialization block is invoked when the constructor is called. What is initialization block? So I'll just show you with example. Let me just open my Eclipse. So what is initialization block? What is static block? All that I'll just show you with a small piece of code so that you will understand. And you need to remember one thing: static block is the first block that gets executed, and after static block which gets executed, initialization block. After initialization block, constructor block will be executed. Remember the hierarchy. Remember this hierarchy. First gets executed is the static block, next gets executed is the initialization block, and next gets executed is the constructor. So these points you just need to remember. So let me take a fresh class. As I said, since we have been daily opening, it is being remembered. So new Java class. So let me use the new name fourth, because already I have used names first, second, third. So let me use the name fourth. Public static void main, and then finish. I have selected the main method also. Yeah, here you can see. Why is this fourth? Already is there. Okay, in which class we have used fourth? Okay, here I have used yesterday, so I just remove this, because since we are in the same project, you cannot have class names being used. You cannot have class names being used. Why is it still saying fourth is defined? I have removed it. It's still there. Anywhere else? It's not there, right? Okay, let me use okay, I think let's continue. Later we will see what is that. F-O-U-R-T-H. Okay, so here I'll just show you what is initialization block. So here I'm just saying an empty brace. So if you have a block with just like this empty braces, opening empty brace and closing empty brace, we call this as initialization block. We call this as initialization block. And here let me just say sys out control space. Then let me just write init block. I'm just writing init block, and similarly let me give another block, static block, static opening brace, closing brace. So observe this. So static block, okay, this static block you cannot have it inside a method. It's like a method, so you cannot write one method inside another method. So that's what sys out control space and let me define this as a static block. Similarly, let me write this init block also outside. Control X, and here Control V, and now Control S. If I just try to run this, there is some error. Let's see by running this, because I have removed the class fourth actually. Yeah, it's getting executed, no problem. So here you can see the output is static block. Actually, if you observe, I haven't created any object. So when I haven't created any object, there is no concept of calling the constructor. Now you observe here, what I will do is I'll just create one object. Fourth OB equal to new fourth. Observe here, I'm not defining my own constructor. So when you don't define your own constructor, JVM will add the parameterless constructor. Remember this point. When you don't define your own constructor, JVM will add the parameterless constructor. So by that you must also understand another point, that if you have your own constructor defined, then JVM will not add the parameterless constructor. So if you don't have any constructor defined by you, then only JVM will add the default parameterless constructor to your class. Right now, I haven't defined any of my constructor. Now, I haven't used any methods also here, but still I just created an object. The purpose of creating this object is just to invoke my constructor. And here I don't have my constructor, so this constructor will be created and added to your class by JVM itself. This constructor you haven't created on your own, so JVM itself will create a parameterless constructor and it will be adding to your class. Now if I just run this program, now you can see the output static block, init block. So this is the point I want you to remember. So the very first block that gets executed is the static block, and next gets executed is the init block, I mean initialization block. But the fact that you need to be remembered here is initialization block will be executed only on the invocation of constructor. Only on the invocation of constructor. Without constructor being invoked, initialization block will not get executed. So the order of execution of the blocks is static block, initialization block, and the constructor. Now, for your better understanding, once again I'll just create two more objects. So here I'll just copy this, Control C, Control V, Control V. Now just observe OB1, OB2, Control S. So observe here what is that I have done here. I have created three objects. So for every object being created, I have to invoke the constructor. And I haven't defined my own constructor, so JVM's default parameterless constructor will be invoked. So the point I want you to note down here is I have created three objects, and now let me just run this program and show you the output and explain what I wanted to convey here. Run as Java application. Now if you observe here, you can see the output. One time static block is displayed, three times init block is displayed. So the point need to be noted here is static block will get executed only once, that too when the class is loaded. Static block will be executed only once, that too when the class gets loaded. Whereas initialization block will get executed for every constructor invocation. So the static block gets executed only once, that too when the class is loaded for the very first time, whereas initialization block gets executed for each time you call the constructor. That's the point that to be noted here. So that is the reason, since I have created three objects, since the constructor is invoked three times, you can see initialization block also executed three times. For every invocation of the constructor, the initialization block gets executed. Now you can have this static block anywhere. It can be in the begin, it can be at the end, anywhere. I'll just show you for your understanding. I'm just pasting this static block in the end of the file. I mean end of the program. I have pasted the static block end of the program. But still that makes no difference. That makes no difference. Now you can still see the same output. So the static block and initialization blocks can be anywhere in the program. It need not be in the begin of your file. It need not be in the middle of the program. Nothing. You can have them anywhere. But anything with the static keyword, opening brace, and some set of statements and a closing brace, we call it a static block. And this static block will be the very first block that gets executed, and it gets executed only for one time, that too when the class is loaded. And if you have just an opening brace and some set of statements and a closing brace, that we call it as the initialization block. If you just have an opening brace and some set of statements and a closing brace, we call it as initialization block. And this initialization block will be executed for each time the constructor is invoked. For each time the constructor is invoked. And the constructor is invoked for whenever you create an object. The constructor is invoked whenever you create an object. And what is the role of the constructor? The role of the constructor is to initialize the instance variables of the class. So when the object is being created, you are expecting the real world space to be there for the object. That means it has to be initialized, just like I said. So all the instance variables of the class will be initialized when the object is being created. For that, constructor has to be invoked. And what is constructor? A special kind of method which has the name of the method same as the class name. And when you don't define your own constructor, then JVM's default parameterless constructor will be added. If you define your own constructor, then JVM will not add the parameterless constructor. You can just see here, for example, if I just write here fourth, now here you can see I have written fourth with the parameter, and here I am not writing any variable, any statement, but still you can see three errors are being raised. If you move there, there you can see the constructor fourth is undefined. The constructor fourth is undefined. So why this error? As I just said now, if you define your own constructor, JVM will not add the default constructor. Since I have defined my own constructor here with some integer argument, it is expecting me to pass that integer argument. Like here I am just saying 5, here I am saying some 6, here I am saying some 7. Actually I am not using those values, but that doesn't matter. But the point to be noted is, since I have defined my own constructor which is expecting an integer value, I have just passed some integer value when I am creating the objects. Now still when I just run this code, it doesn't make any difference. You can see it doesn't make any difference. So the point to be noted, once again I am just reiterating, the very first block that gets executed is the static block, and the next block that gets executed is the initialization block. But static block gets executed only for the very first time when the class is loaded, whereas the initialization block is executed for each time the constructor is invoked, the constructor can be parametered or parameterless, whatever it is. The constructor that is being invoked can be parameterized or parameterless, but still the initialization block will be invoked for every invocation of the constructor. For every invocation of the constructor, initialization block is invoked. So the order of execution of blocks is static block first, and next the initialization block, and next the constructor. This is how the order of executions will be. Now, these are the points I want you to remember regarding the constructor invocations, and I hope everyone is familiar with the definition of class and object, and how do you create the object by using the new operator. And whenever you are using new operator, you must understand that the allocation of memory is during runtime. The memory allocation takes place during runtime, and all runtime allocations will be happening in the heap memory. All runtime allocations will be happening in the heap memory. And another point I want you to remember here is, so here when I am doing this, here OB1, OB2, these are not the objects, these are the references. These are references to the actual memory that is being allocated in the heap. So this may be also one of the question that can be expected. So OB, OB1, OB2, where are they actually stored? So the answer should be stack, not the heap. So the actual allocation for the object is done in the heap memory, but these OB, OB1, OB2, these are the references. These are the reference variables, and these reference variables will be stored in the stack section only. They will be stored in the stack section, which will be having pointers to the memory location, memory in the heap. That's the point you need to note. When I'm saying pointers, don't get confused. Java doesn't use pointers. Implicit pointers is different from explicitly defining the pointers. You can't explicitly create pointers, but implicit pointers is being maintained by the internally Java. So here OB, OB1, OB2 are the reference variables which will be stored in the stack memory, and will have pointers to the actual memory in the heap. So that's the point to be noted here. And next, I want to introduce you to this inheritance, and let me also explain about static a little more. So the static variables cannot be created inside a method. Remember this point. Static variables cannot be created inside a method. So static variables will be created only for the class variables. You will not be having static variables for local. The reason is because static variables are meant for class. Static variables are meant for class. That's the reason you will be creating static variables only within a class, not within a method. This is one point to be noted. And another point yesterday also I mentioned, once again I'm just reiterating. So static method can access only static variables. Static method can access only static variables, whereas non-static method can access both static variables and non-static variables. I repeat, static methods can access only static variables, whereas non-static methods can access both static variables and non-static variables. This is the point to be noted. And again, from a normal method, you can call another method which can be static or non-static. I repeat, from a normal method, you can call another method which can be static or non-static. But from a static method, inside a static method, you can call only another static method. You cannot call another non-static method. Then how do you access non-static variables or methods from a static method? This is the question. So since we are saying that static variables and static methods can only be called within a static method, how do you access non-static variables or non-static methods being called from a static method? So it's only through the objects. The answer is it's only through the objects. That is the reason you can see here even main is a static method. Even main is a static method. That is the reason we will be creating objects in order to invoke any of the other methods of the class or in order to access any of the class variables. So this is the point to be noted here. Now since I said about static, I'll just show you the usage here. Let me just delete unwanted code here. Now I'm just creating here one variable int I equal to, okay, let's just say it int I. Next static int j, and let me define my own constructor. Here you can see if I just write like this fourth, you can see their error because the class name is with capital F. If I am just writing small f also, it will raise error because every method should have return type. If you do not want to return anything, at least you need to define void. You need to define void. But actually why I haven't written the return type here is because I am saying it is the constructor. But as per the definition, the constructor should have the same name as the class name. So I have to define exactly the class name. Now what I'm doing is I'm just writing here I plus plus and j plus plus. Now let me just show you with a simple thing, sys out, and then what I'll do is I'll just print this ob dot I and sys out control space ob dot j. So it's very simple program. Once let me just tell what I have done here. So I have declared a normal integer variable I and a static variable j. I have declared a normal integer variable I, a variable j. Now if you see what I have done, I have created three objects. I have created three objects, OB, OB1, OB2. I have created three objects. And then after creating three objects, I am just trying to display the value of I and j with object OB, which is the very first object being created. Observe this what I am doing. So I just declared one integer variable I, which is non-static, the another static variable j, and then in the constructor I have just incremented both I and j. That's it. In the constructor I have just incremented I and j, and then I have created three objects, OB, OB1, OB2, where OB is the very first object that's created, OB1 is the second object that's created, OB2 is the third object that's created, and then I'm just displaying the values of I and j with the first object. Now let me run this code and explain. So run as Java application. Now if you observe what is the output, you can see there. So the output that's being displayed is 1 and 3. What is it? So when I have displayed ob.I, I got incremented and you have the result 1. But when I am displaying value of j, why is it showing 3? Because I declared j to be static, and as I said, all static variables will be common for all the objects. So what is happening here is when the first object is being created, j, which is not, I hope again I need not explain, I and j are not initialized here, but still since they are instance variables and all the instance variables if not initialized, they will be initialized to the default values. So the default value of integer is 0. So I and j by default, when the object is being created, they will be initialized to 0. So now what is happening is OB, when it is being created, I and j will be initialized to 0, and when the constructor is invoked, I is incremented, j is incremented. So I is separate copy for OB. I is separate copy for OB, whose value is incremented from 0 to 1. Now J, which is the common copy for all the objects of this class. J, which will be the common copy for all the objects of this class. So when the first object being created, its value, which is initially 0, will be incremented to 1. Now, when OB1 is being created, now what happens when OB1 is being created? Since I is normal variable, it will have its own copy whose value will be again incremented from 0 to 1. But whereas J, it's a common copy for all the objects of the class, so that is the reason its value, which is already incremented to 1 when the first object is created, so when the second object is being created, its value will be now modified from 1 to 2. 1 to 2. And similarly, when the third object is being created, again the same. When the third object is being created, again the same. I, since it's normal variable, again it will be incremented from 0 to 1, whereas j, which is the common variable that is shared by all the objects of the class, which is already 2, when OB1 is being created, its value is now incremented from 2 to 3. That's what the output, which you can see, 3. Now if you observe, if not with OB, if I see with OB1 also, you will have the same result. If I just modify this with OB1 also, you will have the same result. Now you can see I have just altered with OB1, and if I just run this, there won't be any difference in the code. You can see again the same, because OB, OB1, OB2, all of them have their own copy of I, whereas J, it's the common copy. It's the common copy. That's the point you just need to remember here. So these are some simple things only, but still you should not be making any mistake when you see them in the assessment exams while marking the answers. That's the reason I'm just saying. You can see again the same. There's nothing different. So these are the points you just need to remember with regard to this static. So static methods can access only static members. When I say members, understand both data and methods. When I say members, understand both data and methods. Whereas non-static can access both static and non-static. And within a static method, how can you access the non-static members is only with the help of the object. Only with the help of the object. This is the point you just need to remember. Now, let me show a few more things. I just want you to observe this. Are these two same? I just want you to have a look at these two methods what I have defined. I just want you to understand, are these two same? The answer is no, because here this we call it as overloaded methods. This we call it as the overloaded methods. Now what is happening here is, this is the string array arguments, which is considered to be the begin point of execution by JVM, and this is also the main method only with the string args only. But here this is not a array. This is not a array. So it is considered to be a normal string variable, but this is the one which is string array variable. So this will be the begin point of your execution, and it works fine. There's nothing wrong here. So this is called overloading. This we call it as the overloading. And here, since I'm discussing about overloading, I want you to remember a few more points here. So if I just say here, let me take some other name rather than being confused. M1. Let me just take M1 and Control C. Now here, what is the point you need to understand is, here I am having a method M1 which is being overloaded, a method M1 which is being overloaded, one with string args, one with object args, one with string args, one with object args. Let me just cut this and write after this object parameter, after object parameter. Now here, let me just call this method M1 of null, M1 of null. If you observe, M1 is a static method and main is also a static method. Since both are static, I can just call them directly. I don't require any object being created. For accessing the static members, I can directly access them without the object. That's the reason I'm directly calling M1 of null. Now here, if you observe, here this is the string argument, this is the object argument. Now this is the object class, and here the point to be noted is object is the supermost class in Java. The point to be noted here is object is the supermost class in Java. So if you have a class defined without any parent, you must understand that the parent of that class is object class. That's what we mean by object is the supermost class in Java. So here any object references can be null. Similarly, any string which is not initialized can also be referring to null. So here, if you observe M1 of null, I'm just saying M1 of null. So object can be initialized to null, string can be initialized to null. Here, when I'm saying null, here if you observe, there are two methods with M1, one with object parameter, one with the string parameter. Now which method will be invoked? This is one of the important bits. That's why I wanted to share it with you. So here, which method will be invoked? M1 which is having object reference, M1 which is having string reference, and both object and string can be referring null. Both object can be and string can be initialized to null. Now which will be invoked? So before telling the answer, let me just run and show you. Oh, sorry, I haven't written anything. Just to determine which method got executed, let us just write a print statement. So here if you observe, I have just written a print statement so that we can identify which method got executed. So if this method gets executed, output should be object. If this method gets executed, output should be string. Now let's see what will be the output if I run this. Now you can see the output string. So thereby you understood that which method got executed, string method. Which method got executed, string method. So the underlying point here is, so when you have the more specific one rather than the generalized one, the more specific will be given first preference. When you have generalized and specific one will be given the first preference. Here object is the generalized one because object is the supermost class, because object is the supermost class in Java, which is parent for all the classes, whereas string is specific one. String is the specific one. So here comparatively object is more generalized one, whereas string is the more specific one. That is the reason string is given the first preference. String is given the first preference over the object, because object can be initialized to null, string can be initialized to null. But despite of that, here when we have two methods with the same name, one with object argument, one with string argument, and when you invoke the method with null value, string is being invoked because it is the more specific one than compared to the more generalized one. Now, for your understanding, let me add one more method here. So here what I will be using is string buffer. In next class we will be discussing about string buffer. For time being, what you just remember is string buffer is used for mutable strings, whereas string class we use it for immutable strings. That's the one point you just remember now. No need to write actually. Here it is error. This will give error because string and string buffer both will be referring to strings only, with only single difference that strings are immutable, which are unchangeable. That's what immutable means. So strings are immutable, whereas string buffer is mutable. So string class and string buffer class both are used for creating and manipulating strings. But string class is immutable. String class is immutable, whereas string buffer class is mutable. So here if you observe, now when I am calling m1 method with null, here object which can be null, string which can be null, string buffer which can be null. And before adding this string buffer argument method, you have seen that string method, the method with the string argument got executed as it is the more specific one with compared to object. But when I have added this again m1 method with the string buffer argument, it is saying error here. And if you move over there, you can observe that the method m1 is ambiguous for the type 4. Now what is happening? Compiler is confused which method to be invoked when null is passed as argument. Now what is happening is, in the earlier case, compiler did not face any ambiguity. I mean compiler did not get any confusion, since it have more specific one than compared to the more generalized one. So compiler did not face any confusion when it has more specific one than compared to generalized one. But now when I have added another method with string buffer as argument, now compiler is confused. Compiler is confused which must be invoked, because string can have null, string buffer also can have null, which to be invoked. That is the reason this is raising compile time error. So this is the points I want you to remember. And next, so I I'll continue with inheritance. I'll just continue with inheritance, because yesterday I got some feedback from students stating that whatever there in the app documents, you will be going through that. So that's the reason I want to give you tips that are useful for you for the assessments, and even for other company placements also. That is the reason I'm directly showing you in this code itself. Now let me show you the usage of this keyword. Let me show you the usage of this keyword. So here, Since all of these things will be there in the YouTube, whenever you wanted to practice, I'll share the link again in our group, just like what I'm doing every day. You can just refer and pause the video and practice it on your own. I'm showing you the usage of this keyword. Observe this. Now, if you observe, what I have done is I've just created a class, and there is an integer variable n, and this is the argument. This is the parameter. This n is the parameter, and here I have just written n equal to n. Now, if you observe, what I'm trying to say is, whatever this instance value is not initialized now, initially it will be 0, but when I'm creating object, I want to set that value n. My intention is to set the value n for the class. So initially I have just declared the n, and the value I am setting it at the time of object creation, and then I wanted to see whether the value got set or not. So for that, let me just print it. So here you can see, now what I have done is I have just created a class, and I have defined my own constructor, and in my constructor what I am doing is, whatever my class variable n is there, I am setting its value when I am going to create my object. So that's what I have done with my code. Now, after initializing my class variable, I'm just trying to check whether the value got initialized or not. For that, I'm just displaying that value, and let us see the output, whether it is got set or not. So what happened? Why the output is 0 and why not 10? If you observe here, the output what it is showing is 0. What is 0? That is the default value of integer. So it is showing still the default value of integer despite of setting the value 10 with my constructor. So this is the point to be noted here. What is happening is, here you have variable n as your class variable, I mean the instance variable. You have your variable n, which is being the parameter of this constructor 4. Now whenever you have this local, that local will be considered. Your intention might be this particular n is equal to this particular n. Observe my mouse cursor. You want to say this n is equal to this n. But when you write statement like this, compiler doesn't understand, and by default, first whenever you have a variable inside a method, it will check whether the variable is of the local. If not of the local, then it will look in the class variables, I mean the instance variables. So whenever a variable is being checked by the compiler, first it will check whether the variable is being defined inside the class, I mean the method, sorry, whether the variable is defined inside the method. If the variable is not found inside the method, then it will check whether it is declared inside the class. If it's not found inside the method or inside the class, then it will raise compile time error saying that the variable is not declared. But here if you observe, what happens? First it will check the local. Since there is local n, it is setting it for the local n value itself. But when you are printing here ob.n, which one we are printing? We are printing of the class 4th n. But you are not setting it for the class n. For that, what we will be doing is we will be using this dot n. We will be using this dot n. And what is this? This refers to current invoking object. This refers to current invoking object. So when I am writing here this dot n, this is nothing but ob dot n. Why can't I write directly ob then? Because I don't know what will be the object name that will be created in the future. Because I don't know what will be the object name which will be created in the future. For that reason, I am just using this, and this refers to current invoking object. So, with whichever object I am going to invoke this method or constructor, automatically this will be replaced by that corresponding object name. That's the reason we use this. Now, when I am saying this dot n, obviously compiler doesn't have any confusion because you are accessing this variable n with object. You are accessing this variable n with object, and you will access a variable with the object only if it is the instance variable. You will access a variable with the object only if it is a instance variable. For the local variables, you will never access it with the object. Thereby, now JVM has clear understanding that whatever the value that is passed as parameter to the constructor is set for the instance variable n. Now if you observe the output, you can expect what you have thought of doing. Now you can see the output 10. Now you can see the output 10. So this refers to the current invoking object. So that's the reason here you can see when I have written this dot n, as I just said now, so you don't access normal local variables with object. Only the instance variables are accessed with the object. That's the reason. Now this dot n equal to n means whatever the value that is passed to this constructor, that value is set to the class n. And that's how when you are trying to access now class n, you are getting the value correctly displayed as 10. So this is the use of this is one of the use of this. This is one of the use of this. Now let me show you another use of this. Let me show you another use of this. Now I am having one more constructor. One more constructor without parameters, and let me just write some sys out, and just let me just give some test. Now if I want to call another constructor from another constructor, now if you observe, I have defined my own constructors, two constructors. Just in the previous case I have shown you what is meant by overloading. So whatever the example I have shown you with m1, that is method overloading we call, and this we call it as the constructor overloading. Whatever the previous example I have shown you, that you understand, that is method overloading, and this is the constructor overloading. Now I have defined two constructors, one without parameter, one with parameter. Now if you observe, from this parameterized constructor, I am trying to call the parameterless constructor. This is legal. This is legal. Now if you observe, I am not calling it by its name. I am not calling it by its name. I am just saying this without parameters. Now if I run this program, you can just see what is the output. You can see test and 10. What is the output? You can see test and 10. Now it's very simple to understand here. Now if you observe, fourth OB equal to new fourth of 10. So when this constructor is being called, control comes here, and what is the very first statement here? This, without parameters. So this is being called. This constructor is being called. So test is being displayed, and control again resumes here. This dot n equal to n, and then this print got executed. Now another important point I want you to remember here is this, whichever I have been highlighted, it has to be the very first statement only. It has to be the very first statement only. Observe this. Observe this. What happened? You can see error. If you just move your mouse cursor there, you can see the description. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. So just undo it. This is the point you need to remember. And it can be vice versa also. It can be vice versa also. Like if I just say fourth with 5, control yes. So this can be like this also. So here rather than doing this, I'm just removing this. Okay, spelling mistake. Oh sorry, I'm not supposed to write like this. That's what I'm trying to say. But again, this of 5. What happened? Okay. At one place I should remove. Otherwise it will end in infinite loop. I hope you can understand. Recursive nature na. So this will be calling that. That will be calling this. This will be calling that. That will be calling this. So it's a recursive nature. Since I have written this in both places. That's the error. Now you can see again run as Java application, and you can see test and 5. I hope everyone understood the usage of this constructor, and compulsory it has to be the very first statement inside the constructor. And another point I want you to remember is it has to be only within the constructors only. You can't call this from the method. If you observe, you can see an error. So this is a normal method, and if you just move your mouse cursor, you can see the description. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. That's the point you just need to note down. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. So this can be used to invoke the constructor from another constructor, as well as it can be used to refer to the instance variable which has the same name as the local variable, So this is the use of this. Remember this usage, and in next class, that's in Monday, I'll be discussing about final usages. In final also you have very crucial things to be understood. I'll just discuss about final and super uses. I'll discuss about final and super uses, and that's what I want you to remember from today's class. And another point which you also can remember is if I am returning, for suppose my return type is the class. Just remember this. This is another third usage. What do you observe from this? Fourth M1. What is this? The return type of M1, the normal method is fourth, which is the class type. At that time also I can just use like this, return this. This is another usage I just wanted to mention with regard to this keyword. So yeah, in the next class, that is in Monday's class, I will be covering the uses of final, super with some tricky ways of asking the questions, because I want you to understand with the tricky way of asking. That's why I'm just sharing all this information. So fourth, yeah, super and final uses I will discuss in my Monday's class. And now I want all of you to mention your roll numbers in the comment section. And if anybody have any queries, please mention in the comment section, so that immediately I'll discuss, and then we can wind up the session. So any doubts in today's class, you can please post it in the comment section. I'll be waiting until all of you mention your roll numbers for attendance purpose. And if any other doubts in today's class, you can post it in the comment section. So I'll just give 5 minutes time. So any doubts in today's class, post it in the comment section. Right now I'll just rectify. If not, mention your roll numbers for attendance purpose. I'll give 5 minutes time. Yeah, so I have received your attendance. So only one query, that is asking me to explain the third usage. As I said, first usage is this keyword can be used to uh, access the class variable when you have the local variable also with the same name. This one, this is the first usage. So when you have class name and the method name, class name not, the class variable name and the local variable name same name, in order to refer the class variable name inside a method which also has the same variable name that has the class variable name. This is the first usage which was highlighted here. The second usage is to invoke another constructor within another constructor, and which has to be the very first statement. Which has to be the very first statement. Now, here if you observe, this is the constructor which is expecting an integer argument. This is the constructor without any argument, and I am calling this like this, which is nothing but this gets executed by passing this 5 as the argument. And the third usage is this one, which is highlighted here. So what is this? You can see here the return type of this method m1 is fourth. The return type of this m1 is fourth. So how can you return the type of the class, which is nothing but the object? How can you return the type of the class, which is nothing but the object? So I am just returning this. So I am just returning this. So when I return this, automatically with whichever object, I am going to call this method m1. With whichever object I am going to call this method m1, then this will be returning that object. So for returning the instance, that's what the point you just need to understand. So you can have the class itself as the return type for a method. You can have class itself as the return type for a method, and when you are going to return the class itself as the method, you are going to return this. So these are the three usages of this keyword. I hope everybody understood this. And as I mentioned, tomorrow and day after tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday will be holiday for you. So you can just practice those logic building exercises. Please don't sit idle. I just recommend you to at least to solve 2 to 3 logic building exercises, because you have altogether 47, and initial logic building hour plan M1 exercises will be somewhat simple. So logic building hour plan M1 exercises will be somewhat simple. When you progress to logic building hour plan M2A and M2B, it will take some little time for you. So that's why, so even though Saturday and Sunday there is no class, I recommend you to practice those logic building hour plan problems. Don't sit idle. Let's meet again on Monday at 10:30 a.m. We'll discuss final and super uses. Okay then. Bye for today's session.